build an organization where people are aligned around the core belief system, you'll have an organization where people will bring their hearts to work.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. This is going to be a lot of fun for a variety of reasons. But when I saw your background, I was like, this is a really interesting story and a very interesting journey. So, Bob, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to come on.
Hey, my pleasure, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me.
One thing you probably don't know because it's not on my resume or my LinkedIn. It's also not on yours, but it was discovered during the pre-call, which is, did I get this right? You started off as an electrician.
I did.
Me
Yeah.
too. I was local 84. What did you do
Really?
in the electrical field?
I worked for this small-ish company that specialized in. So, if you're an electrician, you'll understand this. It specialized in DC power and fire detection and suppression systems for data centers,
Hmm.
and uninterruptible power supplies. So it was the very cool company because it was way ahead of its time in terms of how they focused on culture and focused on building a great organization through the people that were part of the organization. So it was, yeah, I take that with me every day.
Huh. Did you in the moment were you cognizant of like the culture, the feeling, the way that they did business, or is this something that like once you left and started to learn other things, you're like, oh, that was pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, hey, we never used the word culture back then. I mean, we're going back 40 years. We never used the word culture, but I was cognizant of the fact that we were a team. I played team sports all my life, and that we were just a team. And the kind of work that we were doing is you had to rely on each other for, I mean, your own safety as well as others as well. So it was really later in life. When I started doing turnaround work and when I started leading larger and larger teams, discovered how important those learnings were.
I mean, not to get to the spoiler in this, but eventually you've got electrician and you've got CEO on your resume. And so like, where did this come from? So growing up, were you like, I want to be a CEO one day and here's my path, or what did that look like?
It's just kind of strange because, I grew up in a farming family in Saskatchewan, which is right in the middle of the country. And none of that was ever, you never even thought about that. But then when we moved to Vancouver, my dad decided that, he didn't want his kids to be farmers. And so we moved to Vancouver after he sold the farm. And um, we, I was kind of pushed towards the trades, kind of. I did go to university because at one point in time I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I started in university. But here's the thing: is I met my wife when we were in grade 11, and we both wanted to go to university, and we couldn't afford it. So she went, and I took a job as an apprentice and just paid the bills. But I got eh, what the magical thing that happened in that organization is that they believed in their people, and they made a lot of opportunities possible for us if we kind of dreamed it. And one of my dreams was to go back to university, so I did that, and they paid my full load tuition. I mean, I had to go to university at night, but since work during the day. But eventually, when I was about 30 years old, finally, I got my marketing degree.
At that point, were you just like, well, I'm gonna thanks for paying for the marketing degree. I'm gonna go put this to use somewhere else, or what did that look
No,
like?
no, no, no. But again, so then, I can come in waving my newfound diploma, and they say, "Great, now you're a marketing guy." So it came off the tools. We were about $30 million in revenue at that point in time, and then over the next 9, 10 years, we grew really, really aggressively, and we got into all sorts of diversified things. And along the way, we were acquired by Big Bad Telephone Company. And so one of the things that got thrown into my bucket was what they called emerging customer solutions, which is really just an incubator group. And so now I'm part of a $200 million organization, and I'm also leading this incubator group. And yeah, it was kind of baptism by fire. And that's when the first sort of CEO thing came along at a time when I couldn't even spell CEO, and it just kind of morphed from there. Uh, Eventually, again the big bad telephone company, it got moved out of the incubator group and into because I had some successes there, and they go like, oh, he's an electrician, I guess he can fix stuff. So I became a turnaround guy. So I got thrown into parts of the phone company that were broken.
Okay, this is going to be good, because I'm sure there's a ton of lessons that they that you learned in the turnaround process. What when you think about, so start off at 30, grew very aggressively, and it sounds like what was the growth strategy there? So for business leaders that are listening, that are thinking about like, well, I want to grow aggressively. Like, what do you think some of the core ingredients were for that journey over 9, 10 years?
Um, I just thought because, hey, I got this university degree, and now I'm getting thrown into all this other parts of the organization. And boy, I need to become an expert in strategy. So I started consuming everything I could find on strategy. The real learning and the real growth factor was a little tiny bit strategy, but really more so sticking to your core distinctive excellence. And our core distinctive excellence was, hey, we're really good at data centers. We're really good at power for organizations or places that couldn't go without power. So we then started just to move adjacently, and that was just dumb luck that we started to move adjacently and get into servicing network computers, servicing mainframe computers, installing computers, and eventually then moving into financing and doing lifecycle management of computer systems. And so it was all kind of adjacent, and it was just really, as I said, it was just kind of dumb luck. Later on in life, I realized that organizations make massive mistakes when their core excellence is one thing, and then they decide to, oh, let's go over here, and it's completely away from their core excellence. That's when they fail. And there's great examples with airlines. Um,
Got one right now.
yeah,
Southwest. Okay.
yeah, yeah. There's great examples with airlines. United did it. I believe Delta did it. Air Canada did it, where they go like, "Hey, our core excellence is this, and let's go start like a Ryanair type airline. Let's go start like an EasyJet type airline," and they fail miserably at it because it's just not what they do.
What's really interesting about what you just talked about there was this core excellency, and it sounds like there was work around fire suppression systems for data centers. And then when you started listing off all of these other things or all these other business lines that you were able to get into, like core excellence, core competency, like how do you, or do those two things mean the same to you? And like, did you have to build on that competency to get into some of these other things that were beyond the fire suppression?
Well, here's the other thing that wasn't a big thing that people talked about. Now we're going back 30 years, was the core values of the company and the team, the culture of the organization. So we were really, really good at building incredible systems. That was our core excellence. And we were the very, very best that there was. And that's why, the one telco in Canada bought us, because they didn't want us doing that stuff for their competitors. And the thing that we didn't talk about then, Willow, was that we built a team of people that were aligned in their philosophical beliefs around values. And that was, again, dumb luck. I have no idea, that there was no genius in it. It was just dumb luck. But I look back on it now, and especially after having a career doing turnaround work, that is the thing that I always tell leaders today is that build an organization where people are aligned around the core belief system. And we as individuals all have a GPS system on board us that guides us through life. and it is based upon your core belief system or your core values. And if you bring an organization of people together where they are somewhat aligned around that, then you'll have an organization where people will bring their hearts to work. And there's this old IKEA graph where their belief and culture is that if you need an electrician, Ryan and Bob can do the job. But if they're not aligned with the values of the organization, they'll bring their hands to work. So they'll do electrical work, but they won't think outside the box. And usually they're a huge pain in the ass. But if you bring people together that have this amazing attitude and they're aligned around their values, then they'll bring their hearts to work and they'll work harder for a cause or a purpose than anything else. And every time I've had a success, it's been because of that.
When you think about the luck that that organization had in that scaling, and it sounds like some luck that you believe that everybody there brought their hearts in, and it was one of the reasons that everybody was hyper focused around the core excellency and the reason for the growth. You know, were there core values printed on the wall? Were they talked about? Did so?
No, we didn't talk about it. They weren't printed on the wall anywhere. It was self-policed, if you will. And, so we had to rely. When you're building a power room, and there was significant power in there that could kill or maim you. We had to rely on each other, and so we followed. At the time, we didn't even understand what standard operating procedures were, but we followed set SOPs, and we relied on each other. And if somebody didn't follow the process or the procedures, the team itself self-corrected that person. There was no manager that had to step in. And and that was again because we believed in what I would call today values, and we were all aligned around that.
It sounds like a little bit further downstream from a career perspective, you got into turnarounds, and was it in these situations where you started to, and like, was it the difference between a successful turnaround and unsuccessful, or were most of yours successful and you started to realize it's because these people were bringing their hearts into work?
Yeah, I guess I started to lead the same way that I led teams. If I go back to when I was on the tools, I started to lead that way. And I started to get into bigger and bigger businesses. And I think one of my first really large businesses was a 24/7 operation. It happened to be a call center, big call center operation that was in multiple different locations. And it was right around the time that the dot-com boom and subsequent bust happened. And as a result of that, the organization was in significant financial stress. And so that was brought in to fix that. And one of the solutions was that we had 1,500 people. In order to save the business, we had to go down to 1,000 people. So 500 people had to go. And the way that I led that was that it was a 24/7 operation, and previous leaders of that business had never ever been in a graveyard shift ever, or an afternoon shift, right? They did their day shift and that was it. So I started traveling to all the different call centers, and I would be like do a 24-hour shift. And I led the way that I was when I was on the tools, and that people then started to realize that, hey, there's somebody here that cares about them. And somebody here recognizes, human beings have got three basic drivers. We want to feel important, we want to feel valued, and we want to feel appreciated. And just by being there and wandering around and talking to people, and then eventually they bought me one of those flight attendant carts,
I love it.
that folds up, and it traveled with me. So I'd unfold this thing and I'd load it up with donuts and juice and coffee, and I'd walk, I'd push this thing around to different desks, and I would sit down at their desk and have, pour them a drink, whatever they wanted. And then I would talk to them, and I would say, hey, Ryan, that's a great helmet behind you there. Like, tell me the story about that. And through that, people started to realize, oh my gosh, there's somebody who actually cares for me. There's somebody who appreciates the work that I do. Whereas before they just thought themselves as just a call center agent. And that was the success in that turnaround because we were really open about the fact that, hey, we're going to close down this office. And we made it did it in such a way that people really felt cared for and they all stayed until the end. Nobody bailed.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium sized businesses because the organizations that can hire and retain world class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired. You hear so many times, and I mean, I've experienced this firsthand on several occasions, and it's like to me, culture is much like trust, where there's this adage of, trust is it's built in drops and lost in buckets. And I look at culture like that as well, where it's like what you're trying to build, it's like one day at a time, one action, one decision. And it's like one action decision or something, you step over that, if it's all about doing the right thing and you step right over that piece of whatever, that's sitting on the floor, instead of picking it up and putting it in the trash, like you have not followed your own values.
That's exactly it. Right. And I see this with leaders all the time. Ryan, I've led multi-million dollar, multi-hundreds million dollar, but I've led billion-dollar companies. And um, lots of times I've gone into the kitchen and there's a sink full of dishes. Well, I roll up my sleeves and I do the dishes. What the thing that I found, this kind of it's a small thing, but the thing that I find really weird about that is that the people watching this unfold would come over and offer to help. And I said, oh, no, I got this. You go sit down and enjoy your lunch. In those instances, I never ever saw the kitchen full of, or the sink full of dishes ever again. I mean, one time I unplugged a toilet, kept, flip my tie over my shoulder and I unplugged a toilet and people were horrified by that. But I'm going like, we're all in this together.
When an organization goes through a riff, a layoff, and it sounds like you experienced this firsthand, and like when you start to get in those numbers, like 500 out of 1,500, that's a third of the workforce, unfortunately, at the end of this, is going to be unemployed. And like what I've seen is that the degradation that has to the culture. So like, you built up this culture in drops and you've got everybody believing, and then boom, something hits and you've got to make some like really tough decisions for the good of the company and for the good of the people that are obviously going to be there. Like, do you have either things that you've seen or like lessons learned from that experience where you're like, hey, most of the time the culture goes to crap. This is either how you rebound it or this is how you kind of soften those impacts going in.
Well, I learned some lessons from some pretty strange places, Ryan. When I was going through that process of doing that turnaround, my first strategy was to go to all the offices that were going to be closing down and take care of those people. And one of the things that I didn't spend enough time on was the offices that were going to be staying. So two-thirds of our organization was going to survive, if you will. And we put a whole plan together to take care of the people who were going to lose their jobs. But I had completely ignored the other ones, thinking, hey, you get to keep your job, you're okay. And the weirdest thing happened to me while I was in one of those cities uh, doing a shutdown or visiting that call center is I decided to go for a run one morning to relieve the stress. Um, And what I didn't mention is during this whole time as well, I was getting death threats, so I had 24-hour bodyguards. So I ditched my bodyguards and I decided to go for a run along this beautiful lake trail. And while I was getting ready to go for a run, this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, are you going for a run?" And I go like, "Well, duh." And then, I turn around and there's this guy that looks just like Billy Idol in running gear. And so then I said, "Sure." And he says in his beautiful British accent, he says, "Do you mind if I go with you?" And I go like, "Great, they've sent Billy Idol to kill me." Um, uh, so off we go for a run, and so we're just kind of chatting, and it's a beautiful summer day, and I asked him, "What are you doing in this small town?" And he says, "Oh, I'm a musician. I've got a gig here tonight." I never once asked him what his name was, and then he says, "What are you doing here?" And then I just went "Bwah," of all this story of woe. And long story short, over the 45 minutes that him and I were running together, he shared with me his insights. And the biggest insight that he shared with me is, what about the people who are staying? Don't you think that they're suffering? Don't you think that they're grieving? Don't you think that they're worried if the axe is going to fall on them? It was just like, right? Anyways, we finished the run. I shook his hand, showered up, went inside. The security team was really pissed with me, and but my communications director was there, and I said to her, I just explained this, and she goes to me, Billy Idol is staying in this hotel.
That is wild.
Yeah, I've had a crazy life, man.
You went for a jog
Yeah.
with Billy Idol,
Mhm.
and then he gave you some of the a mind-blowing piece of feedback of like, well, what about the people that are staying?
Absolutely. It was incredible. So then we just switched the whole focus, right, in terms of like the call centers we were keeping open. We spent a little bit of cash. We turned them into what we called campuses. We made them a really amazing place to be. And we put our very best leaders in there, the ones that sort of bought into the whole um, culture is everything concept. Hey, and the business was saved.
Was there a time period where there was a drop either in productivity, morale, like, was there a period of months or years that there was some sort of recovery?
During the whole process of doing the shutdown, and this happened over a period of about 4 months. Three key measurables, right? Cost per call went up, employee engagement, because we stayed on top of that, went down, and customer satisfaction went down. So the really three really, really key measurables. And right after we started, switched our focus to making sure that we're building a great place to work. Uh, After the closures happened, then all of a sudden all of that changed, and it changed very, very quickly.
So you didn't go through this process over an extended period of time thinking like, will this ever recover? It sounds like you were looking at metrics, you were talking to people. There was a lot of things that were happening that were giving you these indications that something was wrong. And like, it's not like you sat back and were like, is this ever going to correct itself? Like you were proactive in getting in there and helping move this along.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that when I would think about strategy, one of the things that I always believed in, and how I lead, is that every human being on the planet needs direction. And they look to the leaders of the company, of the organization, of the country. They look to those leaders to give them direction, because it's that direction that gives people some psychological safety that, hey, there's a path forward here. And that's the starting point for people thinking, I'm going to be okay. And so right from the start of the process and every turnaround I do, we create a vision for where we're going. And I have learned to paint a crystal clear picture for what it looks like for when we get there. And I talk about it non-stop. Uh, Success to me around that is that people start to avoid me because they don't want to talk about the vision anymore.
That's there's a general out there that would always talk about um he would he would continue to repeat stuff until his soldiers started rolling their eyes. And he said, because once they started rolling their eyes, I knew that they already knew what I was going to say and it's already sunk in.
I love it. That's a
Yeah.
great story. Yeah, and it's so true.
Yeah.
It's very true.
When you think about turnarounds, and we've talked a lot about the people aspect of it. I love what you just said right there of like one of the first things you do is create a vision. And the reason for that vision is turnarounds, I mean business in general. Turnarounds have a lot to do with the people. A lot people are impacted in turnaround situations. And so you craft a vision and you start articulating that vision and repeating that vision to the team to get people aligned around where it's going. What are some other, like, what are the non kind of human or non people components that you think about when you're walking into a turnaround situation?
In most businesses, with the exception of some small sub $50 million businesses, but in most other businesses, there is no end to metrics. There's no end to data that you can get your hands on. And I always look at it as that those things are the result of everything's done. So if you're driving your car, it's like looking in the rearview mirror. It's looking where you gotta go. You gotta look out the windshield of your car. You gotta look out the front, and not just to the end of the hood. You gotta look way out in front. I've been a pilot for 40 years, and pilots will always say, "I'm always like way ahead of the airplane." Way ahead of the airplane. What that means is they're always thinking like 5, 10 seconds ahead of where the airplane is. And so that's my focus, is always trying to make, and then using the data and and the KPIs that we're marching towards. But those are the resultant of it. So I use that as sort of my gauge, or my panel in front of me, to show me what we're getting. But you're going to get the results with and through the people that you're leading. So that's why you have to look out the windshield.
There's a lot of like companies that are in the midst of turnaround. They're replacing the CEOs, and CEOs have visions and where they want to go. Where's the, like, they look around, they look at the metrics, all the metrics are going in the wrong direction. Like where should they be where should they be looking to build this vision and understand where they need to take this, and minimize the risks that they're actually wrong with where they want to take this?
Yeah, it's a great question. The way I always look at it is, wherever I've been anywhere in the world and looking at businesses and seeing if I can help them, I always look to the leadership first and foremost. So do you have the leadership team? So if I'm installed to lead the business, I'm the CEO, whatever. I look to the level two team. And is a level two team the one that's going to be able to cascade my leadership philosophy? And is the level three team going to be able to cascade that? Because you want to make sure that the message, you can't, one person can't be everywhere. So you got to make sure that the exact same leadership principles and the message is getting through to everybody. So I look to them first. And then I also spend a ton of time with the rank and file. If there's a warehouse, I'm in the warehouse and I want to talk to the guy who's pushing a broom, because there's foxes, so I call them foxes inside of an organization. Those people who are low down in the organization, in the military world, they might be private first class or whatever the lowest rate ranking is. They know stuff. And they pay attention to stuff, and nobody's ever asked them for their opinion. So I start looking for all of that as well. First thing I do in a turnaround when I'm assessing the leadership team is there's leaders that won't make the journey. It's just simply because if the business is in trouble, it's because of leadership. And there's pockets of leadership that have caused this. And so I try to make that assessment really, really quickly and help those people find a different career or a different company to work with. Do they fit the vision of the culture that I want to build? Do they fit the values? And so here's the challenge: is when a new CEO is put in place, that new CEO usually bring his or her value sets to the organization, and then they lead based upon that, because you can't be somebody that you're not. So I always look at, my values are pretty clear and pretty basic and pretty human. And do they fit those values? And you can find that out really, really quickly. I always look for people who've got amazing attitudes. So I don't really care what skills they've got. But if they've got amazing attitudes, you can teach them anything else. And most often, those people in an organization have been suppressed, especially if the organization is not doing well. They've been pushed down and suppressed. And all of a sudden, you'll see them rise up. And when they rise up, the people around them rise up.
Like what's interesting about this is like my experience is mostly $50 million companies and below, and so like when we're bringing people through, we're already looking for that like entrepreneurial, great attitude, fast learner, and then we can develop them from there. When I think about larger organizations like 1,500 or 1,500 people and above, hundreds of millions, billions, you have a lot of career people there, people that are good at navigating politics and bureaucracy to like work their way up. And what's interesting is when I think about that, like kind of trying to suss that out of like, well, they've spent their entire career like, smiling and networking internally and kind of building their way up. I imagine that's like it takes a few conversations before you can get to the, oh, like this isn't going to work, and they don't have the right values.
Yeah, it does take a few conversations. You got to take them out of their environment to really discover, I think it was Henry Ford that said you'll learn more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. So, I do strange things when I first come into an organization, and I do walking one-on-ones with people. If it's raining, even better. I happen to live in Vancouver, so it's raining here all the time. But I take them out for a walk in the rain, and you get to really see people as they truly are when they're pulling them out of their environment. And you see it pretty quickly. You just see it by the way they behave sometimes. I had one leader once that had a PhD, and she said to me, she made some outlandish comment, and I said, well, that's not the way we're going to be doing things here. And then she made the comment, and she said, well, I have a PhD and you only have a degree, so I think I know what I'm talking about. And she didn't last very long.
Do you have turnarounds that didn't go according to plan or didn't go the way that you had envisioned? What do you think was the problem with those?
What happened with those was, in part of my learning, was that they were privately held companies, those ones that didn't work. And there wasn't a lot of them, but they were all privately held companies. And so the ownership was still in place. So they brought me in to fix them. And I let them, I didn't set the ground rules with the owners right up front. And I let them meddle a little bit too much in it. So if I had been clear in the beginning with them saying, hey, here's my process, here's how it's going to work, and oh, by the way, it's going to get worse. Because human beings are like energy, and once a mass is in motion, it takes, an opposing force to correct what it's doing. And so if the organization is sliding, in terms of profitability, whatever it happens to be, and then you come in and you start to change the way things are, it's going to continue going that way. And it, without me being really, really clear with ownership around that, they panicked too early.
And so when you think about and comparing that to like larger companies with shareholders, is it almost like the smaller number of shareholders, the harder it is to get the turnaround because of the amount of influence they have?
Yeah, yeah, that's been my experience. Um, and one of the things I learned, and there's different kinds of cultures that I've walked into. There has been rarely a functional culture, but most often it's a dysfunctional culture, or it's a toxic culture, or the one that I never really kind of put a name. I still don't have a proper name for it. I call it a schizophrenic culture. And not from the mental illness perspective. It's just that what I discovered was that when I'd go into a room and I'd talk to people about where we're going and what their role is, and here's what I expect from you, and here's how we're going to know that it's working, I would see people's energy lift up. And then I would see an owner come into the same room, and I would see everybody's completely different. They would behave 180 degrees differently. And that you see that in large organizations as well. The CEO might come in and have an all hands on deck meeting, and then CEO leaves, and then the leader of that group steps in, and all of a sudden you can just see the energy come out of the room. Everybody has to be aligned on them on where it is you're going.
You walk into a toxic culture, what do you need to attack first, and like how do you be most efficient and methodical about the things that you are addressing to get away from that toxic culture?
When I have gone into a turnaround and I discovered that it is a toxic culture, it's a surgical approach because there's usually a very small faction of people in that organization that are creating that toxicity. And they have influence. We would, in the schoolyard, we would call them bullies. And people, and sometimes they're in leadership positions. And I've actually seen it happen where they are in rank and file positions and they have tremendous influence over the folks in the room. And just through being present and being with people and I call it walking the floor, management by walking around. It's the old classic one. You start to pick up really, really quickly who those folks are. And I learned the hard way because I used to think, hey, I can fix them. I can fix stuff. You can't fix them. So it's a surgical extraction. Get rid of them and fast. And that's when you hear, and you've probably heard this yourself, Ryan, when somebody is let go from an organization because they're not a fit, within a matter of minutes, other people start coming up to the leader that did it and said, thank you. Or they say, what took you so long?
And this gets back right to like what you were talking about earlier. The top two things you do when you walk into a turnaround situation. Number one, you look at the leadership team. Number two, you look at the internal team. And so it's like your tactics and your strategy are kind of the same, regardless of what you're walking into, which is like you got to fix the people component before you can start to fix the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Lots of folks have said this. Richard Branson's got a quote out there that um, he doesn't really focus on clients. He focuses on employees. Employees are more important than the clients are, because if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the clients. And that's I know this now, but I didn't know it then. That's what I did. I took care of the team, the internal team, and made sure that they were okay. And then they served customers better. And when customers are served better, ta-da, revenue increases.
What brought you into the Vistage world after, like, that sounds like an adrenaline, dopamine filled career. And then you're like, let me help other leaders with what I've learned.
Yeah. So what I didn't mention is around 2004, after I've been in the phone company for a little bit, I got recruited by what became Vodafone. Vodafone's the world's largest mobile company. I was charged or, recruited as chief customer officer, charged with helping fix customer service. So that was a big job. There was 10,000 retail locations, literally thousands of employees, hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue at stake. And we operated in 61 countries. So I took that sort of electrician's mindset to fixing customer services in that organization, and ta-da, it turned out really well. They became known as having the very best customer service in the mobile world. And so when that gig was up, I moved back to Vancouver. That was around 2010-ish, somewhere around there. Anyways, I said, oh, what am I going to do now with my life? So I decided I'm going to be a strategy consultant and hung up a shingle on the wall, and that business started to do really well. But I've also been doing lots of speaking because, big job, big company like Vodafone, people would invite me to speak. Then people started saying to me things like, you should write a book. And I go like, ugh. My grade 12 English teacher was my cross country coach, and he said, I'll pass you if you promise never to write anything ever again. So I decided to write a book, and it went number one on Amazon. And so then it kicked off this career as a speaker. I'm traveling around the world speaking about leadership. And then somebody said, "Hey, look at this tech group, Vistage group. Would you come speak to the group?" And I go like, "Yeah, sure, I don't mind." And I loved it because I love being in a room with CEOs that were real curious and they were amazing students and they wanted to learn. And it fulfilled my purpose. And my personal purpose is to unlock potential in people. And um, I did that for a little bit. And then somebody said, "Have you ever thought about being a tech chair?" And I said, "Well, what can I teach people?" And so I said, "Sure." And yeah, so now I've got two groups now, and I love it because I'm filled with people every day that they come and they want to fill up their cup. They want to learn, they want to grow other people, and it's just an amazing environment to be in.
Do you still do the speaking thing? So run groups and you're doing it all.
Yeah, I don't do so much in terms of the Vistage or tech speaking anymore because I've done close to 200 of those. Um, it's just the travel, the short flight travel is really challenging these days. Um, so I'm running groups, I'm still doing strategy work, I'm still doing the odd turnaround project. So I got a pretty busy life.
And you talked about this like personal fulfillment of unlocking potential. What's been really interesting is throughout this whole conversation, it sounds like you've been unlocking potential uh, since being an electrician, and maybe you didn't think of the things that you were doing as you were growing and building and pouring into people. But it sounds like there was this epiphany, or you're like, this is it. What I guess like what does unlocking potential mean, and how do you define that um, of like helping someone reach their maximum potential?
Yeah, it's so. Here's the thing, Ryan. Most people go through their entire lives without even really realizing what their purpose is. And Mark Twain has a quote that, the two most important days in a human being's life are the day we're born and the day we discover why. And I was really fortunate early in my career. And actually, when I was going to university, I was still an electrician. So when I was walking the campus at nighttime on my way to class, I was listening. I had a Sony Walkman in here, way too young to know what that is. And a whole pocket full of cassette tapes. And I was listening to Zig Ziglar, he's passed away now, but he's an amazing, amazing speaker. And one of the things he helped me understand is that you really need to figure out what your purpose is in life. And I struggled with that for a long time, as most people do. And then when I really started to do the work on it, I realized that I love being with people and I love seeing the light bulb go on inside their head where they realize that they're capable of way more than they actually think they are. And so I played with that for a long time. And then it dawned on me one night at 3 in the morning, like, I love unlocking potential. I love like working with individuals and teams and companies to help them unlock the potential that they don't even know that they have. And that's what gets me excited. Like that's why I do the tech and Vistage thing.
For I love this idea of like um, you have to know your purpose in life. Like what's a good step for that? So someone that's listening, it's like, well, my purpose is I make money and take it home, keep a roof over heads, things like that. Like you're talking about something much deeper when you mention this. Like what how does somebody go about that? What's step one?
Earning a paycheck, that's an outcome. And it's what, it pays the bills. That's not a purpose. Um, the step one is to really, really look at the times in your life when you felt like you couldn't fail and that you felt like you were standing on the peak of some mountain somewhere. And you loved every minute of it. You couldn't wait to get to the next day to do it again. And then looking at the days in your life where you just all you wanted to do was hit the snooze alarm 10 more times and not do what you had to do that day. So buried in there are like when you're living your life with that level of excitement, you can't wait to get at it. It's because it's aligned with a purpose. So then you start to figure out, okay, well, what's the common denominator and all of that? It takes some work. It takes some journaling. It takes talking to other people, but eventually you'll fill a page And then I always tell people that I work with, they say, okay, you filled a page. That's fantastic. Now get it down to 7 words. So keep distilling it. Keep distilling it. And once they get there, a whole lot of things in their life make sense.
When you look for new members, like what type of humans are you looking to bring into your groups?
I'm looking for folks. It's interesting because most of the people that come into my groups and stay and they become core members of the groups, at one point in time early in the conversations, they all told me that they felt like they were suffering from imposter syndrome and that someday somebody was going to discover them for being the fraud that they are. And so we'd unpack that, and what I really realized was that they wanted to learn, they wanted to grow, they wanted to stretch themselves, they wanted to be better than what they perceived that they were. And these are people who big jobs, big big paychecks, and they still felt like they were imposters in that. And um, really starting to work on helping them build their confidence and who they are. Really, I always tell people you got to be you because everybody else on the planet is taken. And so really helping people understand that you are you, and there's huge benefits that and value you have to offer the world. And so I'm being long-winded on that answer, but that becomes the core of my group.
Can you say that one more time? Uh, you are you because everybody else on the planet is taken. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You're Ryan Hogan, and you got to be Ryan Hogan because everybody else is taken.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Like one of my first companies, because I start off enlisted in the Navy and I'd always look at officers and I thought you had to be a certain person to be in a leadership. And so like my first company I took off, like I, I came in with like a suit jacket and nice because that's what I thought you had to do. And it wasn't until I, that company bankrupted. And then it was the next company where I was like, I'm just going to do me and we're just going to figure this out. And that company did not bankrupt, which is a check in the block. But yeah, I took the shoes off, I might have just thrown them away. I don't know. Bob, thank you so much for coming. Like I've got a whole like 2 pages of notes on this and you've got some like zingers in there too. Yeah, there was just some amazing like one-liners and some incredible bullet points. People need to feel important. They need to feel valued. They need to feel appreciated. Um, Thank you for taking the time to come on and share your knowledge and wisdom.
My pleasure, Ryan. Anytime.